Hello and welcome back to the Restart, Revamped, Revived live from the Wish House, the podcast with me, Cris Spinner. I am so excited to be finally up and running. It's been a minute, as they say, and in this first episode, we're going to find out why. I'm generally regarded as a pretty positive or optimistic person, so I decided in these first two episodes to lead in with a little Cris-losophy on what works for me and what works for me to stay that way. So today we're starting with hold the vision, trust the process. Why don't you go grab some coffee? Because we're ready to go. So let's start with a few questions. Are you trying to start something? Maybe you're trying to attract something specific into your life. Do you want to make a move, but so many times it seems like the universe is throwing something into your path to mess up your plans, and you're feeling frustrated or disappointment, kind of stuck like a car in the mud? Well, I'm going to attempt to be your tow truck today and help you reframe for the future. I'm going to tell you one of my stories as an example. I have so many stories I could use for this, but I'm going to use this specific one today because it stays on point and kind of ties in how I returned to this creative space, which includes my podcasting. It's been a little bit of a journey with a lot of holding visions and trusting processes, so it seemed fitting. Let's go back a bit to 2014-15. I had a radio show called The Cris Spinner Show, very similar to this, conversation, inspiration. But during that time, my son, who was autistic, moved to a support community outside the home, and my daily life changed. After 2.5 years, my journey with that show came to a close, but I had my eye on podcasting then. But I was still working full time and traveling a lot to be with my son, so it didn't really feel like the right time to begin. But I knew I was going to be retiring soon, and I was itching to create something. So back burner plan, retire, begin the podcast, and dive into content creating on social media apps, sharing my life, things I love, my music. So in 2019, I retired. My intention was to take the world by storm with my ideas, and then a global pandemic. Locked in my house, thwarting all my plans. But I kind of stumbled into accidental broadcasting. But now in retrospect, I wonder, was it really accidental? One night during the early days of the pandemic, I was bored and by myself at home, and I decided to just pop on a Facebook Live and say hi to everybody and have a little virtual chat as to what we were doing to get through these kind of unprecedented and crazy times. And I stayed online for about an hour. And at the end of that broadcast, people were saying, would you come back tomorrow? And I'm thinking in my head, yeah, no, this isn't really going to be a nightly thing. This was me looking for some company during a global pandemic. But it was fun. It was fun to connect with people. And so I did. I came back the next night and then the next night. I broadcasted for 2 years straight, 5 nights a week. Some nights I would do interviews on a split screen. Some nights I would give advice. Some nights I would do my Cris-losophy, comedy, skits, fashion shows, music, crafts. I had a built-in audience and a good, healthy following. So I knew that when the pandemic was over, I was going to emerge and jump into my podcasting. Already had a following. I began podcasting in earnest in March of 22. Took me a little longer because at that time I had a son living in residential and my mom was elderly. So I didn't come into the community again full force until about 2022. But once I did, I dove in podcasting once again with the intent of being your new best friend, cup of coffee in hand, sharing great conversation, inspiration, and what I like to call ordinary enlightenment. These are my own brand of lessons learned, things I've gleaned from experiences I had, because I'm not a doctor and I don't play one on TV, but I love to share what I've learned with the intention that you might come away from the listen with some good food for thought. My journey always seems to be sprinkled with so many different bridges to cross, which I now know were for my highest good, which we're going to talk about in a few moments, even if it didn't feel like that at the time. So in March of 22, I decided this was my time. Universal redirection, divine timing, established audience. Here we go. I began podcasting. I did about 6 episodes out of my home. I'm not that tech savvy. So I remember hoping for an opportunity to have someone step in and help me record. My early podcasts were well received. And then my mom got sick. Aging. She started falling, very stubborn about moving out of the house. She was living alone, 2.5 hours away from me. A new era had begun. I always say that's going to be another podcast series, lessons I learned from mom, lessons I learned from aging mom. And I found myself once again balancing my life, my mom on one end, my son on the other, and of course me on the bottom. It's always what it's like when you're a caregiver. Spent the next 2 years in a change, living, learning, except that's not what it felt like at the time. At the time, it felt like a disruption. It felt like my life was not mine, and I really couldn't see an end in sight. I was trying to make my plans work. I was trying to continue the podcast. I was trying to continue the content creating, but eventually I had to surrender and realize that none of this was really in my control, and I needed to walk my talk, hold the vision, trust the process. That if I do believe that things happen for my highest good, then I need to believe that all these things were happening for a better purpose toward my creating. And I had to just go with it. Now, because I work a program of this kind of thinking, it wasn't difficult for me to do that or to accept that. What was difficult for me was not wanting to wait anymore. Although I was holding and trusting, I didn't like what was happening. And we don't have to always like what's happening. We don't have to like what is being doled out for us as our highest good. Always reminds me of the song from Mary Poppins. A spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. So we don't have to like taking the medicine, but if we sprinkle a little sugar on it, it goes down much easier. And that's the mindset. The mindset is the sugar. So if we can convince ourselves or practice working toward taking that mindset medicine, it's easier to accept and then decide that what's happening is definitely for your highest good. But I just didn't want to have any more obstacles. Here's what I believe. I believe there's a version of us in the future, a higher self, a developed self, that if we open our mind, we are creating with every single step of our journey. And I believe we work with another entity. So suffice to say, I know there's a higher power, an outside force. I don't know what that looks like, but I know what it feels like. And since I have come to accept that what is occurring is for the development of that higher self, it gives me a sense of comfort. I'm less stressed more often. And who wouldn't want that? But it takes blind trust and it takes blind faith. So in April of this past year, April of 24, we lost my mom at age 95. She had her mind till the end and had lived a long life, of course, filled with many joys and some sadness. But you can't ask any better than that. A beautiful, long life surrounded by family and friends, which I was privileged to be present when that life, as we know it, ended here. So for me, it's a different kind of mourning. And suffice to say, I found myself with that responsibility taken off my plate. But now I had more insight and more knowledge and more life experience in my wheelhouse. I felt like the universe was saying, it's your time. I felt almost completed. However, I did look cautiously up and down the street before I trusted the universal permission to cross the street to create. And now I'm on the other side, and I realized it's taken me 10 years from the time of my first radio broadcast in 2014 to now to be able to embark on this part of the journey. the part where I get to share and hopefully inspire, the part where I feel like I'm embracing my calling. I feel like everything that came before that, all the life lived, has been for what I can confidently share now. And now I see why it needed to be that way. It needed to be that way because now I feel perfectly aligned. If I think back, all of those other times I was ready to start, ready to create, I feel almost that they were false starts. The alignment wasn't there. This is the first time I feel like two magnets have clicked together. It's really the most knowledgeable I've felt to create. It's kind of like a little personal renaissance or a little age of Aquarius in Chrislandia. And I got to get an old wish granted because, as you remember, I was kind of hoping that somebody would come along, and I stumbled upon the opportunity to work with a professional studio that's now producing my podcasts and assisting with my content creating, which is something I was missing. And like a friend of mine says, abracadabra, and that piece fell into place as well. So here I am. I held a vision. I allowed the process to bring me to where I am. And I truly felt no stress and no angst surrounding that belief system. Hold the vision and trust the process sounds a lot like there's a reason for everything. And people don't like to hear that statement because many times it's said when what's happening isn't good. I tend to be a more more glass half full person. And I do believe that life is kind of like a circle. And 3/4 of it, like if it were a pizza, is great. And then there's a quarter of it that you can expect to be not great, not pleasant, not to be good. There's going to be struggle. Nothing tells us that we're going to have 4/4 of that 100%. But I subscribe to a belief system that there's a purpose bigger than my purview of it. And that we only see what we want to see. It's kind of like looking through a telescope and only seeing what that telescope will allow you to see in that circle. So I compare it to a painting. If you look at a whole painting, let's say we're looking at a landscape, and so we see a house and the grass and the birds and the flowers, we can see the whole picture. We can see how it's all relating to the other objects in the picture, in the painting. But if you take that telescope, if you take a spyglass, if you will, and look at the picture just through that, you're only going to see that one portion of it. And I think that we go through our lives seeing only that one portion of it. And we're holding on to that one portion of it. There's almost a subconscious fear to open that spyglass and see what else is informing that portion of the painting. So there's almost a little bit of a fear to expand that view as to what is informing your life, whether you're in that good space or whether you're in that fear space. You have to trust. And trust comes when you believe that if you take that spyglass off your eye, you would see how whatever is happening fits into the wider picture as a whole. And when you work on believing that, convincing yourself of that, practicing that, and recognizing that happening in your life, then the phrase everything happens for a reason becomes almost comforting. And it can free you up from feeling stressed. And it gives you permission to not be in such grip control of what's happening. So how about a practical tip then for feeling less stressed, for beginning a little bit of this process? I heard Fran Drescher tell a strategy when things don't go her way, what she does. She used a grocery store line. I've also heard other stories around that same kind of a theme. She said whenever she's in a grocery store line and somebody is checking out that's a couple people ahead of her, and that person is perhaps having trouble with their card, or they're fumbling around in their purse for the change, or the cashier has to call for a price on something, and she's wanting to get out of that store as quickly as possible, but she's now detained. She said that she has learned to assume that she's being held there for her protection, that something is outside of her purview, that wouldn't be good for her. So she's being detained. I've also heard that around. People say if you forget something in your house and you have to run back in the house to get it. So you get in the car, you realize you forgot your glasses, you run in the house to get them. You're supposed to stay there and count to 10 or give yourself a minute before you leave, because the legend is that there's an angel protecting you. That's why you forgot. That's why you need to go back in and stay before you get back on the road or before you get onto your journey. And the first time I heard those stories, I loved those thoughts so much. I like instantaneously loved it and instantaneously started thinking that way, or at least reminding myself to think of that every time I encountered a bump in the road, a situation that felt unpleasant, something getting thrown in my path that doesn't get me to the path that I want, the goal that I want. It can be something small. It can be something big, something annoying, something aggravating. I use that and it's given me a comfort. I have less stress than in this situation because I relinquish the control. I loosen the grip. I think everything happens for a reason. I hold the vision. I trust the process. I reframe that by reminding myself that there is something bigger than me. And I'm attracting this for my highest good. I'm attracting this obstacle, big or small, for my highest good, for the right time. And that puts me in a state of gratefulness or joyfulness. And that makes you attracted more good. We know that more good is coming to us when we're in a state of joyfulness or gratefulness. So when I'm applying it to the daily, ordinary, mundane situation, I find it much easier to understand that the external protection or reconfiguration can only bring me success in whatever bigger thing I'm embarking on. You know, I often say out loud when something good happens that's small in my daily life, I recognize that. You know, I'm in a rush. If it's something is, people often give the parking space as an example, because we all encounter that you're running quickly to do an errand and you're hoping that you can find a parking space right in front of the store. And sometimes you're coming down the street and you don't see a space. And then all of a sudden the universe surprises you because someone's pulling out of that space. And there you are pulling in. And I think, oh, I'm protected in the small. Why don't I believe I can be protected in the big? And I remember that, and then I let it go. It's not a toxic positivity. It's a diving deeper into your own mindset of creating, of being in control with an unseen partner. And that is what truly is meant for you, is not going to pass you by. Because a lot of times we fight against trusting. Trusting's a hard thing to do. It's knowing that something is there without seeing it. It's believing that something is there without seeing it. It's feeling that something is there without seeing it. You can't prove it. You can't explain it. You only know it. And that's a hard thing. Even to convince ourselves, even to speak to ourselves about that, it's a hard thing. We want to hold on to our idea of how things are supposed to go. We want to have the ultimate grip. We want to have the ultimate control. You know, there's a saying that if it rains on your wedding day, that's good luck. And I'm always thinking that that's just made up by people who think that it's very disappointing, that your pictures are going to be ruined, that you don't want to get out of your limousine with the rain falling down, that your day is going to be ruined because of this. But I often think, what if that's true? What if it does mean good luck? What if you let go of that grip? What if you've attracted that luck to yourself by virtue of the fact that you've let go, that you've accepted the rain, that you found beauty in the rain or purpose in that rain? So let's use that as a little metaphor. Don't let the rain stop you. Don't let the rain convince you that you don't have the proper umbrella. And if you don't have the proper umbrella, you might have to sit it out until it stops raining. And that's okay too. See, the expression hold the vision and trust the process is not hold on to the vision for dear life, because that wouldn't work. You have to think it always works out. It always works out for your highest good. It always works out for your highest good so that your higher self can flourish. Now you're thinking, how do I get myself to the point where thinking like this becomes not a difficult thing to do? Well, that's coming. I'm going to give you a little Cris-losophy around that next time. So for today, sprinkle some blind faith on whatever you're encountering. Loosen the grip. Go dance in the rain. And I'll see you next time on Live from the Wish House with me, Cris Spinner.